With the release of his most recent film, the car chase movie Baby Driver, British director Edgar Wright has established himself as a master of genre. But even more impressive are the three movies for which he is best known, his collaborations with actors Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Unofficially called the Cornetto Trilogy, these movies, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End, each combine tiny character drama with over-the-top genre beats. Shaun of the Dead looks at the zombie apocalypse through the perspective of a 20-something loser. Hot Fuzz transplants an 80s action hero into a sleepy English village. And most appropriately given its title, The World's End takes this to an extreme. In The World's End, Pegg plays Gary King, a middle-aged burnout whose best years are long behind him. And so he gathers together all of his old teenage buddies in order to return to their hometown and complete the pub crawl that they did not finish 20 years ago. But while Gary is still stuck in his past, each of his friends have moved on, to the point that they are not quite so happy to spend time with their formerly charming but now self-destructive friend. This is especially true of Gary's one-time best friend Andy Squire, who has cleaned up, become sober, and is living a prosperous life. So the first half of the film is concerned largely with the group of people kind of reliving the past and seeing how far they've moved on from that past. And that's when it switches, when they realize that their hometown has been taken over by an alien force called the Network, which claims to be a benevolent force and will give the people of Earth a perfect life so long as they fall in line and follow the Network's orders. Those who do not are replaced with nearly perfect copies, which Gary and his friends call blanks. And so The World's End takes us from a midlife crisis to literally the end of the world. Hi, my name is Joe George, and you are watching Renewed Mind Movie Talk, a weekly series in which we take a look at a piece of popular culture and examine it through Christian theology. The World's End is a difficult movie to work with because it's hard to trace its worldview. The hero of the story, again, is Gary King, and Gary is not only an alcoholic, but he is more importantly kind of selfish, rude.
We're not here as your friends, we're just your enablers.
Yeah. Enabler? It's a funny word, isn't it? Enabler. Gary King and the Enablers. That's a good name for a band, Steve. Write that down.
Don't do a Gary.
Oh, is that a thing now, is it?
It's always been a thing.
Yeah. You don't need us to help you get up. You have done a perfectly good job so far on your own.
And at the same time, he is the hero. After all, take a look at this, the climactic speech of the movie, in which the Network reveals itself and tells Gary and his friends about its perfect plan to not only give Gary and his friends everything they wanted, but to elevate human civilization and to make them ready to be part of this vast cosmic community. And yeah, the Network admits it's got to toss aside a few people who don't quite fit that plan, but isn't this better for everyone? Gary's response is a little bit more profane than I can play in whole here, but this is the gist of it.
Face it! We are the human race, and we don't like being told what to do.
Just what is it that you want to do?
We want to be free.
Yeah.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Yeah.
We want to get loaded.
Yeah.
And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do.
It's pointless arguing with you. You will be left to your own devices.
Really?
Yeah.
Gary, King of the Humans. The movie is only somewhat ironic in talking about Gary that way. He is the exemplar of the humans and all of their messy and nastiness. And it's important to note that the movie never really strays away from Gary's nastiness. When we first meet him, we see that he is a deeply unhappy person. He's in group therapy. And while group therapy can be wonderful and constructive for most people, Gary does not admit that he's wrong. He doesn't see the problem, therefore he's not getting the help. And in fact, he's trying to run away from his problems. Repeatedly, characters will call him out for being ridiculous. The most obvious here is Sam, played by Rosamund Pike, the woman that he kind of had a crush on in high school, and who comes right out and tells him she is not interested anymore today.
You know, the whole free spirit, quick one and save all toilets thing, it's kind of cool when you're 17, but not when you're facing 40.
So clearly we're not supposed to admire Gary. I mean, Pegg brings his considerable charm to making Gary likable and at least tolerable, but we're not supposed to want to emulate his life. And yet at the same time, the movie understands that Gary is a better example of what it means to be human than the blanks are, the clone replicas that the network leaves behind. And we see that most clearly in this powerful scene here, which recalls both the scar-sharing scene in Jaws and the blood test scene in John Carpenter's The Thing. Here, once they've all gathered together in the smokehouse, the survivors realize that any one of them could be a blank. And so they have to prove to one another that they are in fact human. And they do so by showing one another their scars, which ultimately leads to Gary himself sharing his deepest scar, not the ones where he tried to kill himself, but rather his emotional scars, the way that his life has turned out.
It never got better than that night. That was supposed to be the beginning of my life. All that promise and optimism. That feeling like we could take on the whole universe. It was a big lie. Nothing happened.
But as messy and broken as Gary is, he's still the hero of the story. As the movie calls him, Gary, King of the Humans. And this is very much the movie's worldview. The human life is a messy life. It's a disappointing life. We in fact find out that as put together as Andy seems to be, or any of the other guys, they're still not living the life that they thought they were going to have. And that's okay, because the perfect life is an inhuman life. And making mistakes, having scars, having flaws, is part of what makes us human.
What is it they say? To err is human. To err is human! So,
It's no accident that this phrase gets repeated throughout the movie. And that's a surprising stand to take against the network, which again is showing up and offering humans with inclusion into this global community, and even offers Gary and his friends their dreams, whether it be these dream girls from high school, or in the case of Gary, the chance to return back to his youth, which he thought was the best time of his life. The network says if only humanity would get its act together, would clean up its messes and become perfect, then it can be included. The movie says no. It's better to be a messy, broken, scarred human than it is to be a perfect blank. That can be a difficult message for Christians to deal with, because too often we think about Christianity as, if not actually in practice, then at least in idea, perfect, right? That when we become Christians, we become good, nice, perfect people, and therefore, if we are not that, we are not Christians. Or worse, we often try to tell non-Christians that once they get their acts together, then they too can become Christians. If there's one failing of the evangelical movement, and there's certainly more than one, that's one of the biggest. This idea that Christians are only for, or Christianity rather, is only for perfect people, and therefore you need to look good and get your act together before you get through the door. That sort of attitude would exclude somebody like Gary King, obviously. That type of attitude, at least in the movie's worldview, is a lot closer to the network. I mean, Christians sound like the network in a lot of ways. We're going to give you inclusion into this perfect community if only you act like us and you get rid of everything that doesn't quite fit with who we are. Believe it or not, that's antithetical to the Bible. The Bible shows us often quite the opposite. The Bible is filled with flawed, broken people. I mean, if you pick up a Bible and you literally crack right in the middle, what are you going to hit? You're going to hit the Psalms, which are nothing but, I shouldn't say nothing but, which are filled with, praises towards God and these sort of devotional things, but a lot more than you think, filled with claims about how broken and flawed and angry we are. And these are written largely by King David, who we understand to be a man after God's own heart. If you look at Jesus' ministry, he's constantly going back to this. One of the best examples of this occurs in Mark chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, which reads, "And as he reclined at a table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, 'Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?' And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." Now, really quick, a couple of terms there that we need to define for modern audiences. First of all, when he says tax collectors, he doesn't really mean the IRS. He means something closer to like gangsters, is how tax collectors operated in this time. And so these would be gangsters and people that kind of betray their own people. They were taking money from the Jews who were in captivity and then turning it over to the occupying Roman government and taking a little bit extra for themselves. So not real popular people. The Pharisees, on the other hand, are fairly popular in that they are the church people. These are the people that knew the scriptures better than anybody else. They knew the moral laws better than anybody else, and they spent a lot of time telling people what to do. And this little scene here is a good microcosm of something that happens throughout the Gospels, throughout Jesus' ministry, where Jesus shows up and hangs out with gangsters, with prostitutes, with the sick, with the unloved, with the rejected, and spends most of his time with them, with bad people. And church people, the Pharisees, are constantly coming to him saying, "Stop, you're doing the wrong thing, stop, stop, stop." In other words, to put it into world's end terms, Jesus spends most of his time hanging out with people like Gary and gets most resistance from people or things like the network. In other words, rather than spending time telling people, "You got to be perfect if you want to spend time with me," no, Jesus looks out for the people who are scarred and broken. He loves humans and wants to be with humans. This is important because the people that think that they're perfect, like the network people, he can't teach them anything. They don't know how to love and forgive because they don't think that they need to be forgiven for anything. They think whatever love that they have, they've earned. The people like Gary, the people that are messed up, like this tax collector here, those are the people that Jesus can work with because they know they've messed up. They know that they've been broken, they've been scarred, and Jesus can come to them and say, "I forgive you, and now let's use that forgiveness to go forgive other people." And so if we are watching The World's End and we find ourselves judging Gary and kind of sympathetic with the network, we need to take a good long look at ourselves because then we are thinking more like the Pharisees and less like Jesus.